All right, I'm live. Well, hello, friends and neighbors. Welcome to Nate from the Cave, episode 3. Look at that. The viewership is going up like crazy tonight. Sit down, relax, grab yourself a drink. All right. Just like that, we lost everybody. All right. Let's get into it. It is 8 p.m. here. I got a few notes from last week that I, upon reflection, thought I should mention. And just want to briefly overview. So we went over some definitions last week. We read the Allegory of the Cave, which is one of my notes that I wanted to mention was from the Allegory. So at one point, Socrates said that if you direct yourself towards the shadows, towards the base realm, toward the realm of opinion, you will produce just more of the same. And I thought that that was interesting. I was thinking about it in terms of ethical implications, where a common thing that comes up a lot in philosophy is people will say, if there wasn't this tragedy or the other, then we wouldn't have the good that came from it. And my counter argument is no, you can still obtain good without necessarily experiencing the bad. You can still conceptually get there. And if you can conceptually get there and you can imagine a better way, then you don't necessarily have to fall into the pitfalls that others have, especially if you have things like history. Like I can't remember if we read any of it last week, but Socrates will mention a lot from history of like we can learn from what's going on in these other places. We can learn from these other types of governments. We don't have to keep making the same mistakes, and you don't have to live through something bad in order to conceptualize something better. In fact, his theory is that when you orient yourself away in the quest for truth, for real truth, that you will obtain not only knowledge of the forms, but the physical product of that knowledge through our activity, which is virtue. And so, the importance of virtue from the allegory, directing one's soul towards base activity, closes off one's ability to ascend to truth, while directing one's soul toward virtuous activity allows ascension, because the virtues are ideals by which we manifest through right action. So he had the example of people who basically the class in their society who were allowed to be educated were oftentimes lazy, and he used slothfulness and gluttony as an example of how that will corrupt you. That will actually drag yourself down. And we'll get into some reading tonight when we get into the section on the soul of how he argues that in virtuous activity actually drags your soul down and weighs it down with the physical too much. So I thought that was interesting, and I had one other note from last week too. I already mentioned it. All right. We can know the just, capital J, by way of witnessing injustice, and we can know virtue by looking closely at the fruits vice produces. So I guess that was a little inversion of what I said a second ago. But nonetheless, both are true, but you can look at other examples as well. But that was from Phaedo's section on recollection. And we'll get a little bit more into recollection tonight. We're going to start with the minnow, and we're going to get more into recollection and how it builds. So we went over some terms last week, some facts about Plato, and facts about Plato. And we started with the theory of the forms, and we ended with the Phaedo. And so we're going to get into recollection starting right away. This light is bothering me. I don't like the shadows. I'll be right back. Look at that. Much better. All right. So, the minnow. In the minnow, Socrates is talking to Minnow. I call it the minnow. It's not called the minnow. It's just called Minnow. Minnow is his interlocutor. And I wasn't sure if you guys were aware of this. Last week I was reading, different voices because that is how I read. But if you can see there's actually there's this all caps Socrates, and then down below it'll say Minnow. They're actually talking back and forth. That's why they call them dialogues. He's not always just in dialogue, though. Oftentimes there are 3 or 4 other rhetoricians or his students that he's speaking with, but we just refer to them as the dialogues. All right. So in the minnow, also I forgot to mention last week, I'm not giving you page numbers. So if you're looking this up in a copy that has the, what are they called? Becker or Brecker references. Those are the little numbers on the sides. Those are from older translations into smaller books. So these would be the original page and section numbers from, I think it was Brecker's translation. So I'm going to read Minnow 80D to 86C, and that'll get us started in Recollection. I think that's really the main long one. I know last week there were some long ones, but we'll just get it going. All right. ADD, starting with the phrase, so now, this is Socrates speaking. So now I do not know what virtue is. Perhaps you knew before you contacted me, but now you are certainly like one who does not know. Nevertheless, I want to examine and seek together with you what it may be. And then what we're about to read is Minnow's reply, and this is known as the paradox of inquiry, or I believe it's also sometimes called the learner's paradox. But this is one of those terms that scholars refer to these things. So I'm not going to just read the whole thing. I can just synopsize, because as I was reading it last week, I realized we don't need to go through all of that. So I'll read you the paradox. Minnow replies, how will you look for it, Socrates, when you do not know at all what it is? How will you aim to search for something you do not know at all? If you should meet with it, how will you know that it is the thing that you did not know? I'm just going to read it. I know what you want to say, Minnow. Do you realize what a debater's argument you are bringing up? That a man cannot search either for what he knows or what he does not know? Rephrasing the paradox. He cannot search for what he knows since he knows it. There is no need to search. You already know it. Nor what he does not know, for he does not know what to look for. Makes sense. It's like asking a blind man to tell you about colors. Does the argument not seem sound to you, Socrates? Not to me. Can you tell me why? I can. I have heard wise men and women talk to about divine matters. Minnow, what did they say? What was, I thought, both true and beautiful. He's already thrown it in there a little bit. Got to hook Minnow with the forms. Socrates, or Minnow, what was it? And who were they? Socrates, the speakers were among the priests and the priestesses, whose care it is to be able to give an account of their practices. Pindor too says it, and many others of the divine among our poets. What they say is thus: see whether you think they speak the truth. They say that the human soul is immortal. At times it comes to an end, which they call dying. At times it is reborn, but it is never destroyed, and one must therefore live one's life as piously as possible. And then he has a poem here, which I'm assuming is from Pindor. Persephone will return to the sun above in the 9th year, the souls of those from whom she will exact punishment for old miseries. And from these come noble kings, mighty in strength and greatest in wisdom, and for the rest of time men will call them sacred heroes. As the soul is immortal, has been born often, and has seen all things here and in the underworld, there is nothing which it has not learned. So it is in no way surprising that it can recollect, that's the key word, recollect the things it knew before, both about virtue and other things. As the whole of nature is akin to the soul, has learned everything, nothing prevents a man, after recalling one thing only, a process men call learning, discovering everything else for himself. If he is brave and does not tire of the search, for searching and learning are, as a whole, recollection. Another interesting thing about Plato is he will throw in these virtues, which, if we reflect on our own lives, bravery and courage is required, even for these so-called minor tasks that we might set before us. But if you're going to learn something, you got to have some moral fortitude, for sure. I believe that. We must therefore not believe that the debater's argument, which is what Socrates refers to as the paradox presented before. If you already know something, you don't need to search for it. If you don't know it, how do you search for it? You don't even know what it looks like. So we must therefore not believe the debater's argument, for it would make us idle, and faint-hearted men like to hear it, whereas my argument makes them energetic and keen on the search. I trust that this is true, and I want to inquire along with you into the nature of virtue. So we're not going to get into virtue, but the way he solves the paradox, I think, is interesting. We can decide for ourselves whether or not it proves the existence of the soul once we're done reading it, but I think it's a very interesting one. So right now, he's going to call over one of Minos' slaves. And this is also important to know, is that Minos slaves didn't have, the slaves in Greece, they didn't have access to education. So he's going to ask him a series of geometrical questions. And actually, I'm going to summarize that because it gets confusing. That's something you should read for yourself because you got to kind of read it slowly. But essentially, he calls over the slave who has no education, calls him one of his young slaves. So I like to imagine he's probably between 8 and 14. I probably read that somewhere once, so that's probably what I think. But, kind of in that age, he has experience. And he draws out a square on the ground that looks like that. So it's 2 feet by 2 feet, and then he draws a line down the middle. And he asks him a series of questions. Like this. A square, then, is a figure in which the 4 sides are equal. The slave replies, yes, indeed. And it is also these lines through the middle. And it also has these lines through the middle equal? Yes. So, yeah, he draws the square ABCD. Let's see, he goes down. And essentially he says, okay, now do you know doubling? Do you know halving? Okay, so if you double the square, it'll be 4 feet by 4 feet. That's a 16-foot square. How do we make an 8-foot square? And essentially he walks through with the slave just by asking him questions, and they figure out what a third of the square would be. And then finally he says, okay, we know how to make 2 by 2. We can do a 2 by 2 square. So we got a 4-foot square and a 16-foot square. If you double it, how do we make an 8-foot square? And so just by asking questions, the slave boy is able to determine, by putting these diagonals through, he's able to have it. Have the sides, and he has his 8-foot square. Yeah. So Socrates then says, so the man who does not know, this is now down in 85C, between C and D. So the man who does not know has within himself true opinions about things that he does not know, so it appears. These opinions have now just been stirred up like a dream, but if he were repeatedly asked these same questions in various ways, you know that in the end, his knowledge about these things would be as accurate as anyone's. It is likely, Meno replies. And he will know it without having been taught, but only question and find the knowledge within himself? Yes. Again, his interlocutor always agreeing. And is it not finding knowledge within oneself recollection? Oh, of course it is, Socrates. Must he not either have at some time acquired the knowledge he now possesses, or else have always possessed it? Yes. If he always had it, he would always have known it. If he acquired it, he cannot have done so in his present life. Or has someone taught him geometry? For he will perform in the same way about all geometry and all other knowledge. Has someone taught him everything? You should know, especially as he has been born and brought up in your house. Meno. But I know that no one has taught him. Socrates. Yet he has these opinions, or doesn't he? That seems indisputable, Socrates. So it's also interesting just to imagine Meno sitting there kind of watching it happen. And it's just a cool picture. That age, though, if we're assuming he's in that age 8 to 14, this is my counter argument to the theory of recollection is in order to double a line, to know what a line is, to know what a squared edge is, those sorts of things, you have some sort of fundamental principle in my mind, which when we get into Aristotle next week, that's kind of what he argues too, is it may not be this recollection of the soul that Socrates talks about, but if we can attain fundamental principles. But then there's the interesting question of the first guy who did it. And you got to remember, Socrates and Plato, they were way back when, and they were with the Euclidean, or they were learning from the Euclideans and the Pythagoreans, and they were highly influential in this philosophy. So, yeah, who started it? How did they attain these things? It's a good question. Socrates has a good theory. So, must he not either have at some time acquired the knowledge he now possesses, or else have always possessed it? Yes. Oh wait, sorry, we read that. So I know he hasn't been educated, yet he has these opinions. Yes, that seems indisputable, Socrates. If he has not acquired them in his present life, is it not clear that he had them and had learned them at some other time? It seems so. Then that was the time when he was not a human being? When else could it have been? If then, during the time he exists and is not a human being, he will have true opinions which, when stirred by questioning, become knowledge, will not his soul have learned during all time? For it is clear that during all time he exists, either as a man or not. So it seems, Socrates. Socrates. Then if the truth about reality is always in our soul, the soul would be immortal, so that you should always confidently try to seek out and recollect what you do not know at present. That is, what you do not recollect. Meno. Somehow, Socrates, I think that what you say is right. Socrates. This part I like a lot. I think so too, Meno. I do not insist that my argument is right in all other respects, but I would contend at all costs, both in word and deed, as far as I could, that we will be better men, braver, and less idle, if we believe that one must search for the things one does not know, rather than if we believe that it is not possible to find out what we do not know, and that we must not look for it. I agree with that. Socrates likes to hedge a little bit because he's a wise man. But I agree with that. If you buy into Meno's paradox, what up, Nate? What up, Chaz? If you buy into Meno's paradox, you will never go on that quest. And so I wholeheartedly agree that even if you can't prove the immortality of the soul, or that your soul knows all things, and so learning isn't really learning, it's just recollecting things, starting with that presupposition will definitely give you the courage to try to figure those things out. And then he also says that we have to learn it through questioning, that is the Socratic method. We are just questioning. We have an idea of the name of what we call what we're after. In this case, in Menno, is virtue. But that's not always the case, and it can be with lots of things. It can be like with lots of practical things. Like, well, I can think of two examples. When I started my first business, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't come from a family who ever started businesses, and the lack of knowledge, there was definitely a few moments where I could have let the lack of knowledge stop me in my tracks before going and figuring things out. And then yeah, I could have let it stop me. But I also had to develop the right questions to ask, and that comes through trial and error, and so it comes through failure. So there's certainly a process to the practical things. The second example I think of is the first time I read philosophy was, like I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, when you're reading philosophy, sometimes it is like you're learning new things, but oftentimes philosophers have a way of just articulating the things that you already have known through your experience and putting it into words that you can actually use, that you can use in your own mental framework. So I think that using that theory of recollection as a framework to pursue any form of education, I think is extremely useful. Let's see here. Socrates, these are my commentary. You get a little bit of me now. He posits that the soul is immortal and knows all things. We read that. What we call learning is actually recollecting the things that our soul already knows. This is how we are able to have knowledge of things we do not know what it is. That is the Greek in Socrates's in Socrates' language. Remember, autokathato is itself by itself, so, or itself in itself, which is to mean the forms. So the Greek phrasing there was things we do not know what it is. So basically, we don't know the higher good. We don't know its true nature. And if the soul already knows all things, we have a duty to search for what we do not know in order to recollect the knowledge our soul possesses. And again, if you do not treat these things like a duty, you will indeed be stuck at the bottom of the cave, looking at shadows and competing with your neighbors on who can identify what shadows are. All the while, you're just talking about a bunch of nonsense. So that's some good stuff right there. Recollection. That's really, if we're going to read one thing on recollection, that's probably the main one there. But I have one other short reading from Phaedrus. Let me pull it up here. Phaedrus 249 A through C. I have B through C here, but I put A through C there. Either way, it's only a paragraph. Okay. Socrates. Is Phaedrus? I can't remember if someone. It doesn't matter. All right. Of all these, any who have led their lives with justice will change to a better fate, and any who have led theirs with injustice to a worse one. In fact, no soul returns to the place from which it came for 10,000 years, since its wings will not grow before then. Obviously, we all know that, right? We've all been to church after the no soul returns to the place from where it came for 10,000 years. Obviously, everyone knows that. Since its wings will not grow before then. That makes sense. Got to spend some time with the forms. Except for the soul of a man who practices philosophy without guile, or who loves boys philosophically. Don't forget that one. Don't forget that one. If you want to go down a fun rabbit hole, search up the gay theory of Plato, loving them boys philosophically. If after the third cycle of 1,000 years, obviously after 3,000 years, the last mentioned souls have chosen such a life 3 times in a row, they grow their wings back and they depart in the 3,000th year. As for the rest, once their first life is over, they come to judgment, and once judged, some are condemned to go to places of punishment beneath the earth and pay the full penalty for their injustice, while the others are lifted up by justice to a place in heaven, where they live in the manner the life the life they led in human form. When they live in the manner their life in human form has earned them. In the 1,000th year, both groups arrive at a choice and allotment of second lives, and each soul chooses the life it wants. From there, a human soul can enter a wild animal, and a soul that was once human can move from an animal to a human being again. Again, obviously, we all knew that. But a soul that never saw the truth cannot take a human shape, since a human being must understand speech in terms of general forms, proceeding to bring many perceptions together into a reasoned unity. I have that highlighted. Can't remember why I highlighted that. But a soul that never saw the truth cannot take a human shape, since a human being must understand speech in terms of general forms, proceeding to bring many perceptions together into a reasoned unity. I mean, it makes sense. I don't buy into the same theology that Socrates had, but given the fact that he was Greek isolated and basically only had pagan religions around him, that's a very interesting way to think about things. So here, basically, what he's saying is, he's reciting a speech. That's right. So he's reciting a speech. What I just read is it's kind of the middle of the speech that he's reciting. It's like 4 pages. There's no way the dude just knows it verbatim. Plato's a little taking some liberties there with making Socrates seems like he has an infallible mind, an infallible recollection. But anyway, Socrates is reciting a speech by Stesichorus, Euphemimus's son from Himera. So that translates etymologically to Stesichorus, son of good speaker from the land of desire. And they put that in earlier in the dialogue at 244a. Socrates says, "I'm about to recite a speech for you. You ready, Phaedrus?" So the soul's capacity to recollect the forms it once beheld in the hyperanium realm explains philosophical love and the possibility of true knowledge. Philosophical love, or to put it another way, the love of wisdom, which is true wisdom is rationality, moderating the spirit and the appetite. And we'll get a little bit more into the Republic, but I know I've mentioned that a few times. In the Republic, I suppose that would be justice, wouldn't it? We're going to read a definition of wisdom here in a minute, but philosophy is the love of wisdom. And that's just important to keep in mind. So it explains philosophical love and the possibility of true knowledge, meaning to have intelligible knowledge the way I have knowledge of this can. I'm able to know it because, again, Plato is a realist. The things in the real world are able to be known. But because my soul has spent 10,000 years with the forms, and then again, it goes through these cycles of thousands of years before you're reincarnated, I'm able to abstract, forms like container or canness or cylinder or artifact, So we're able to do these mental abstractions because our soul has already spent so much time with the forms. All we have to do is ask the right questions. What is this? What is this shape? And we're able to recollect things. Here's my commentary, my for real commentary. All metaphysical inquiry, this is my view on metaphysics, by the way. All metaphysical inquiry has some level of presupposition. So that means that you come to the table with a certain set of assumptions, And in philosophy, we call those presuppositions. We're presupposing certain facts about reality. Hopefully, through your inquiry, you're able to either confirm or disprove some of those presuppositions. I've certainly done that a number of times over the years, and I hope to continue to do that. But it is the fact that we come to the table with presuppositions. Some people disagree with me, but I'm telling you, it's the fact. For Socrates, he presupposes and seems to take for granted these theological precepts that we just read and throughout that whole speech as an explanation for why it is that we can know, quote unquote, anything. That is to say, how we know through or by way of recollection. Because again, we don't learn, we recall. So, to me, with that idea of recollection in mind, the next obvious question is like, what the heck is the soul? Because again, we went over the forms last week, but I can tell you what they are. But the gap between, okay, thanks for telling me your theory, but how do I prove that to myself? How do I actually know that is true? For Plato and Socrates, it really comes into the concept of the soul. Like, okay, cool idea of recollection. I can kind of see what you're saying through my own experience, but what exactly is the soul that you're talking about? So to me, that's the next obvious question. So I'm going to hop over to the Phaedo, which I believe is in the beginning of this book. And let's see. Yep, Phaedo's at the beginning, or towards the beginning. So there's four arguments for the soul. These are their like technical. Other scholars have given them these names. I'm not just saying them because I am inventing them, getting them from other scholarship. So we're going to read the affinity argument, or often called the kinship argument, like kin, and the final argument. But there's the cyclical argument, which is the argument from opposites, which when we get into Aristotle, I'll probably have to touch on his logic a little bit, because again, Aristotle formalizes a lot of this stuff, where Socrates just kind of throws it out there. Aristotle really formalizes, which is another great thing. When he formalizes logic, it gives us a framework. We can now make deductive arguments. We can make inductive arguments to get at knowing what the forms are, knowing what true reality, what being qua being, what being as such is. And so the four arguments are the cyclical argument, which is in Phaedo 70c to 72e, the recollection argument, which we read the back half of last week, which introduced us to recollection, which we just read, which is 72e to 72e to 77a in the Phaedo. The affinity argument, which we're about to read, which is Phaedo 78b to 84b, and his final argument, which is 102a to 107b. So we're going to read those. Is the final argument really that long? Right on. Cool. All right, let's jump in. 78 to 84. Again, Brecker references, not page numbers. Because I'm using the Hackett Publishing, The Complete Works of Plato, highly recommended by scholars of all kinds. I should get like an affiliate link or something like that in case you want to buy it. I just saw that Ruben said lighting 10 out of 10. Gracias, muchacho. 78b to 84b. All right, let's get going. That shall be done, said Cebus, but let us, if it pleases you, go back to the argument where we left it. Of course it pleases me. Splendid, Cebus said. Socrates, we must then ask ourselves something like this. What kind of thing is likely to be scattered? On behalf of what kind of thing should one fear this? And for what kind of thing should one not fear it? We should then examine to which class the soul belongs, and as a result, either fear for the soul or be of good cheer. Remember, we're now into the section on the soul. So, what does Plato think the soul is? Should we be afraid that our soul shall be scattered? I don't know. What you say is true, Socrates. Is not anything that is composite and a compound by nature liable to be split up into its component parts, and only that which is non-composite, if anything, is not likely to be split up? I think that is the case, said Cebus. Are not the things that always remain the same and in the same state most likely not to be composite, whereas those that vary from one time to another and are never the same are composite? I think that is so. Let us then return to those same things with which we were dealing earlier, to the reality of whose existence we were giving an account in our questions and answers. Are they ever the same and in the same state? Or do they vary from one time to another? This was equal sticks, opposites, those sorts of things. Can the equal, capital E, itself, the beautiful, capital B, itself, each thing in itself, the real, ever be affected by any change whatever? Or does each of them that really is, being uniform by itself, remain the same and never in any way tolerate any change whatever? Well, it must remain the same, said Cebus, and in the same state, Socrates. What of the many beautiful particulars? Remember, particulars was one of our hot button terms, but a particular can say if there is the form of canness. What of the many beautiful particulars? Be they men, be they men, horses, clothes, or other such things, or the many equal particulars, and all those which bear the same name as those others? Do they remain the same, or in total contrast to those other realities? One might say, never in any way remain the same as themselves, or in relation to each other. The latter is the case. They are never in the same state. These latter you could touch and see and perceive with all the other senses, but those that always remain the same can be grasped only by the reasoning power of the mind. The abstraction, it's a more modern term, but the abstraction, the reasoning power of the mind. They are not seen, but are invisible? That is altogether true, he said. I believe Phaedo, by the way, is telling one of his friends about the conversation he had with Socrates. So this one's a little bit more narrative. That is altogether true, he said. Do you then want us to assume two kinds of existences, the visible and the invisible? Let's assume this, Socrates. And the invisible always remains the same, whereas the visible... Sorry, a bug flew in my book. Whereas the visible never does? Let us assume that too. Now, one part of ourselves is the body. Another part is the soul. Again, Socrates is just asking questions, just helping this guy recall. Quite so. To which class of existence do we say the body is more alike and akin? So this is the affinity or the kinship argument for the soul. So to which class of existence do we say the body is more alike and akin? To the visible, as anyone can see. What about the soul? Is it visible or invisible? Well, it is not visible to men, Socrates, he said. Well, we meant visible and invisible to human eyes, or to any others, do you think? To human eyes. Then what do we say about the soul? Is it visible or not visible? Not visible, Socrates. So it is invisible? Yes. So the soul is more like the invisible than the body, and the body more like the visible? Without any doubt, Socrates. Haven't we also said some time ago that when the soul makes use of the body to investigate something, be it through hearing or seeing or some other sense, for to investigate something through the body is to do it through the senses, It is dragged by the body to the things that are never the same, and the soul itself strays and is confused and dizzy, as if it were drunk, insofar as it is in contact with that kind of thing. Certainly. So this is him talking about the things that we interact with, the things that we aim are reasonable apparatus, which is to say, what we aim to be our ends that motivate our primary actions in life. If those things are lower things, we drag our soul down to earth with it. If we aim up for the good in all we do, we bring our soul up. We transcend. Again, this is transcendental philosophy. Well, certainly, certainly, Socrates. But when the soul investigates by itself, it passes into the realm of what is pure, ever existing, immortal, and unchanging. And being akin to this, it always stays with it whenever it is by itself, and can do so. It ceases to stray and remains in the same state as it is in touch with things of the same kind, and its experience then is what is called wisdom. Altogether well said and very true, Socrates, he said. So, another way of phrasing wisdom is to have knowledge of the good. And our soul has attained wisdom because obviously it spent at least 10,000 years before it could even grow wings, just hanging out with the forms, and the primary form being the good or the true. Judging from what we have said before and what we are saying now, to which of these two kinds do you think that the soul is more like and more akin? Well, I think, Socrates, he said, that on this line of argument any man, even the dullest, would agree that the soul is altogether more like that which always exists, in the same state rather than like that which does not. And what of the body? Well, that is like the other. Ah, very good. You're not a dimwit after all. Look at it also this way. When the soul and the body are together, nature orders the one to be subject and to be ruled. Okay. When the soul and the body are together, nature orders the one to be subject and to be ruled. So Socrates is making an assumption or an appeal to some sort of natural law as well. Nature orders the one to be subject and to be ruled, and the other to rule and to be master. There's something called the master-slave dialectic in philosophy. So this is another form of the master-slave dialectic within oneself. Your soul and your body. Which one is in charge? Then again, which do you think is like the divine and which like the mortal? Do you not think that the nature of the divine is to rule and to lead, whereas it is that of the mortal to be ruled and be subject? I do. Of course you do. If it was us against God, it would be obvious, right? So if our soul participates, remember that's that word that's saying the things in nature participate with the forms in order to have their instantiation of whatever they are. I participate with humanity. I participate with tallness when I'm around someone taller than me. I participate in shortness, etc. The soul participates in this divine nature. So it would follow that if the body participates with this material nature, and I have both, then the soul should command the body and not the other way around. Consider then, Cebus, whether it follows from all that has been said that the soul is most like the divine, deathless, intelligible, uniform, indissoluble, always the same as itself, whereas the body is most like that which is human, mortal, multiform, unintelligible, soluble, and never consistently the same. Have we anything else to say to show, my dear Cebus, that this is not the case? We have not. You've exhausted all possibilities, my dear Socrates. Well then, that being so, is it not natural for the body to dissolve easily, and for the soul to be altogether indissoluble, or nearly so? Of course, Socrates. You realize, Socrates said, that when a man dies, the visible part of the body which exists in the visible world, and which we call the corpse, whose natural lot it would be to dissolve, fall apart, and be blown away, does not immediately suffer any of these things, but remains for a fair time. In fact, quite a long time if the man dies with his body in a suitable condition and at a favorable season. If the body is emaciated or embalmed, as in Egypt, it remains almost whole for a remarkable length of time. And even if the body decays, some parts of it, namely bones and sinews and the like, are nevertheless, one might say, deathless. Is that not so? Well, yes, of course, Socrates. Will the soul, the invisible part which makes its way to a region of the same kind, noble and pure and invisible, to Hades, in fact, to the good and wise God, whither, God willing, my soul must soon be going, will the soul being of this kind and nature be scattered and destroyed on leaving the body, as the majority of men say? Far from it, my dear Cebes and Simmias. But what happens is much more like this. If it is pure when it leaves the body and drags nothing bodily with it, as it had no willing association with the body in life, but avoided it and gathered itself together by itself and always practiced this, which is no other than practicing philosophy in the right way, in fact, training to die easily. Or is this not training for death? It surely is, Socrates. Oh, what a noble mission we're on. So again, practicing philosophy in the right way means he's discounted all these other ones. He's discounted sophistry, he's discounted rhetoric, and he's defined philosophy at aiming your soul towards the good so as to enact right behavior. Right behavior over time through habit. This is another important part. We haven't gotten into any ethics, which we'll get to at another time, but we're just going over the metaphysics. But happiness is achieved at the end of your life so long as you aim to know the good, and by that knowledge, you mix it with your body, and through right action over time, creating, the word is habitus, so it's doing the right thing as often as you can to make it basically a habit, and it creates phronesis, which is practical wisdom or prudence. And in so doing, by doing the right, the good, the true, the just, as often as one can throughout the course of their life, that's how he defines happiness. Why does he call it happiness? Well, let's keep reading. A soul in this state makes its way to the invisible, which is like itself, the divine and immortal and wise. And arriving there, it can be happy, having rid itself of confusion, ignorance, fear, violent desires, and the other human ills, and, as is said of the initiates, truly spend the rest of time with the gods, also known to Plato. He doesn't believe in gods, plural. That's one of his accusations in his apology while he's on trial. He's accused of being an atheist. He does believe in a god. And above that, he believes that the forms are the ultimate reality of nature. And where did I... Rest of time with the gods. Shall we say this, Cebes, or something different? Well, this, by Zeus, said Cebes. Or Kebus, whatever. I don't know Greek pronunciations. But I think that if the soul is polluted and impure when it leaves the body, having always been associated with it and served it, so if you make the soul the servant and the body the master, so the soul always being associated with it and served the body, bewitched by physical desires and pleasures to the point at which nothing seems to exist for it but the physical, which one can touch and see or eat or drink or make use of for sexual enjoyment, And if that soul is accustomed to hate and fear and avoid that which is dim and invisible to the eyes, but intelligible and to be grasped by philosophy, again, the love of the good, the love, wisdom, love of the knowledge of the good. Intelligible means having a rational understanding. When we get into more medieval philosophers, we'll get into phenomenology, which is the bridge between knowledge and metaphysics. But the intelligible, the intelligible aspect of something is like, again, looking at the can, seeing the color and being able to abstract that, this isn't the only yellow thing that's ever existed in all of creation. It's not the only cylinder that's ever existed. It participates with some form beyond itself. So I can the intelligibility of this can is the abstract nature of it. And to be grasped by philosophy, the love of the knowledge of the good. Do you think such a soul will escape pure and by itself? Impossible, Socrates. It is no doubt permeated by the physical, which constant intercourse and association with the body, as well as considerable practice, has caused to become ingrained in it. Quite so, Socrates. We must believe, my friend, that this bodily element is heavy, ponderous, earthly, and visible. Through it, such a soul has become heavy and dragged back to the visible region, in fear of the unseen and of Hades. It wanders, as we are told. Yeah, he gets more into his theology. The soul is good, but of inferior men. These are not the souls of good, but of inferior men, which are forced to wander. Yeah, so he gets more into what the soul has to do if it didn't live a good life. Yeah, that's about it for there. I can go on for a few more pages, but here's a good bit. I will tell you. How so, Socrates? I will tell you. The lovers of learning know that when philosophy gets hold of their soul, it is imprisoned in and clinging to the body, and that it is forced to examine other things through it, as through a cage and not by itself, and that it wallows in every kind of ignorance. Philosophy sees that the worst feature of this imprisonment is that it is due to desires, so that the prisoner himself is contributing to his own incarceration most of all. As I say, the lovers of learning know that philosophy gets hold of their soul when it is in that state, then gently encourages it and tries to free it by showing them that that investigation through the eyes is full of deceit, as is that through the ears and the other senses. Philosophy then persuades the soul to withdraw from the senses, insofar as it is not compelled to use them, and bids the soul to gather itself together by itself, to trust only itself in whatever reality existing by itself the soul by itself understands, and not to consider as true whatever it examines by other means, for this is different in different circumstances and is sensible and visible, whereas what the soul itself sees is intelligible and invisible. The soul of the true philosopher thinks that this deliverance must not be opposed, and so keeps away from pleasures and desires and pains as far as he can. He reflects that violent pleasure or pain or passion. He reflects that violent pleasure or pain or passion does not cause merely such evils as one might expect, such as one suffers when one has been sick or extravagant through desires, but the greatest and most extreme evil though one does not reflect on this. What is that, Socrates? What's the greatest evil? That the soul of every man, when it feels violent pleasure or pain in connection with some object, inevitably believes at the same time that what causes such feelings must be very clear and very true, which it is not. Such objects are mostly visible, are they not? Certainly. So, he's making the distinction between the physical, the material world, and the non-material world. Which is why He's a bit of a dualist. He's a bit of a dualist, a bit of an idealist. All right. So that is the affinity argument for the soul, or the kinship argument for the soul, meaning that the body is akin to the material world and the soul is akin to the divine world, and thus the body shares in the nature of the material world, which is to say that it is subject to destruction and disintegration, as he put it, whereas the soul is not. It is indivisible, it is immortal, and yeah. Let's see if I put any other things here. Yeah, it shares in their divine, indestructible nature. I think that's very interesting. If you ever read any Catholic philosophy or Catholic theology, you will understand why Plato is so influential and why many Christian doctors of the church have what they call it is baptizing Plato. They have baptized Plato into a new understanding. And again, Plato was 430 years before Christ. So, I mean, if you just read the Apology, he was not having it with the Athenian religious system. He was not having it with the, what was it, the Olympian gods. He thought that was nonsense. In fact, there's I can't remember which one it is, but there's dialogues in here where he's chatting with people. He's chatting with a guy on the way to court. He's always headed to court, or one of his buddies is always headed to court. But this particular one, he runs into his buddy and he's like, "Where are you going, bud?" And he's like, "I'm going to court to sue my dad." I can't remember the circumstances, but he I think his dad threw one of his slaves into a pit or something like that. Or his dad threw one of his own slaves into a pit and the slave died, and so he's going to go sue his dad because he didn't think that was right. And the guy's whole justification was because he's pious. And so they get into the Olympian gods or the Athenian gods. And yeah, Plato's not having it. There's too many contradictions, and they're all based, a lot of these pagan gods, they're all based in this material stuff. It's all based in desire. And to Socrates, that was just obvious that it was not true because it's too base. Not based, base. All right. We're going to hop ahead for the final argument here in Phaedo 102. Echecrates. We're still in Phaedo, right? Yeah. Yes, by Zeus Phaedo. And they were right. I think he made these things wonderfully clear to anyone of even small intelligence. Oh, this is them retelling another dialogue to their friends. Let's hop ahead. The final argument is just a recollection of the opposites, the equals, and the kinsmanship argument. So we don't need to read that. But if you are interested in it, the final argument for the soul, again, then there's those four arguments that the Platonic scholars have given the names for them. The final argument is Phaedo 102a through 107b. Looking good, Nate. Nathaniel. What's up, Nathaniel? I'm just over here reading, not my comments. All right. Last week we went through 5 pages of notes. Tonight we only have like 2.5, 3 pages. So very nice. Very nice. I think I got rid of that one too early. Nope. We're moving on. We're going on to the Republic. We're not going to read this part. In fact, there's only a couple more small ones to read. But so the Republic I believe he's talking to Glaucon. I believe that's who his interlocutor is. Let me hop over to it. He's talking to Glaucon, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Socrates and Glaucon. And so in the Republic, I believe the question is, what is justice? I believe that's what Socrates poses to Glaucon, or the other way around. Or maybe the question is, what is a just city? That might be it. And so I can't remember. It's one of these ways. I didn't read the beginning of it, so I can't remember the primary question. It's been a while. They're either after what is just, like the just. What is justice? How does one act justly? I'm pretty sure the question is, though, what is a just city? And so, as an analogy, Socrates just says, if we want to understand how you would run a city, why don't we look at how you would run a person? Or maybe it's the other way around. If you want to know how to run yourself, let's let's spend all this time building out the just city. But anyways, either way, Socrates divides the soul into three parts: the rational, the logistikon. It's in the head. That's where he puts it. This is also the philosopher king of the Republic. The spirited, my Greek pronunciation, bear with me. Thymoides, it's in the chest. And the appetitive, or appetitive, whatever. Epithemetaken, in the belly, whose proper harmony constitutes justice, mirroring the three classes of the ideal city. So the philosopher kings at the top, the head, that's the rational, the logistikon. The spirited are what he calls the guardians, where they're sequestered. They live off by themselves. They're like the Spartans, and they are taught. They're taught philosophy because you get the next philosopher king from the guardian class, and then you have the appetitive, or the the animal appetites, which are in the belly, and this constitutes the rest of the city. That's me and you. We're down in the belly, and I think I told you this is where a lot of philosophers I went to school with would just be like, philosophers or Plato is classist. I'm not even going to read him. He thinks we're all just animals. We just have animal instinct. Not getting the analogy, I guess, that you should roll yourself with your freaking head. But anyway, that's lost on a lot of people. What are you going to do? Socrates said you can just rip them out of the cave and drag them up, but then they're going to be bewildered and blinded and probably find their way back down. So got to find a more gentle way, I suppose. So that's how he divides the soul. The soul has those three parts: the logistikon, the thymoides, and the epithemetaken. Epithemetakon. So that's the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. Another interesting. It's a very short book, but it was 3 lectures that C.S. Lewis gave, called "The Abolition of Man," and I believe it's the first lecture that he calls "Men Without Chests," and it's a throwback to this. We've made this huge distinction between the emotional, the animal instinct, the appetitive nature of a human, and we've juxtaposed, whatever, put up in opposition that the rational. So it's either rational or emotional. And he says, but what about the heart? What about the chest? We've created men without chests. And how do we expect anything from this next generation if we've removed any talk of beauty, if we've removed any talk of courage, any of the virtues? How do we expect anything from anybody? And then we remove their chests, we create these men without chests, and we ask them to be the next leaders, and we ask them to solve all of our problems in our old age and all this stuff. And he uses a few lines from a textbook from an elementary school, and he points out the assumptions in the line about, it's an aesthetic line basically. It's he calls it the Green Book. They're looking at a waterfall, And one guy says, oh, I'm experiencing the sublime, and another one says, I see something beautiful. And then the teaching part of the book for the kids doesn't address the sublime at all. It says, no, you're actually just projecting your own feeling onto the waterfall, that you're having an experience of feeling beauty. Where classically, one would say that that is an indication that you are in the presence of the sublime. The sublime being the ultimate participation with the form beauty. Another bit on the soul that I'm not going to read, it's a fun one, but I'm not going to read it, is in Phaedrus 246a to 254e. It's his chariot allegory. I believe in Republic Book 11, he also has the chariot allegory. The soul is pictured as a charioteer, which is the reason, driving a noble white horse, the spirit, and a base black horse, the appetite. The myth explains embodiment, the soul's fall, and the erotic struggle toward the forms. So I like that one a lot too, because you're driving a chariot, you have two horses. One is the spirit, one is the appetite. I think it's in the allegory that he gave in Book 11 of the Republic, where they're sort of always pulling in two different directions. And so to be a good charioteer, you have to encourage them to work together to reach. Because you're like circling the earth. You're going like 1,000,000 miles an hour. That's the other thing about this charioteer. I mean, the one in the Phaedrus, I can't remember. That one might be more literal, but one of them, you're out in space and you're trying to tame these two things in order to make it to heaven to spin, so your soul can spend another 1,000 years with the forms, or the logos. The logos. All right. So that is the soul. Any questions? Nothing. Just lots of compliments. Right on. Thanks, boys. And it's 9:07. Excellent. I don't think I'm going to do... Oh, I am going to read just a tad bit of the divided line. Let me find that. Perfect. I'm already there. 509 to a 511. Perfect. So from here, I'm going to move into knowledge. And I know this is metaphysics, but epistemology and metaphysics go hand in hand. Because how do you know being? How do you know what the ultimate nature of reality is? Like I said, you can talk about different theories, but if you don't have a solid epistemology to connect yourself to that, it's just very unsatisfying for me. And I always hated that when I was in school, that professors would always want to sequester that, and they might not want to take questions on it, things like that. So it was a pet peeve of mine, so I'm including it here. All right, the divided line, where do we go? Sorry, I have a note on Theaetetus. Theaetetus proposes the justified true belief. That's right. He calls it the ability to give an account. And then Socrates refutes it with I think 3 arguments. And yeah, he refutes all 3 possible meanings of an account. So to give an account would be like the example is that you're a lawyer presenting an argument before a judge, and all you have is one witness. And so in order to not pass judgment on the accused by just one witness, which was hearsay, you have to provide an argument. And what Theaetetus says is that means to give an account. He says, well, what does that mean, basically? And so they work out that to have knowledge, so that the judge can have like knowledge of what actually occurred, you have to have at the very minimum judgment. You have to have a justification. It has to be true. It has to actually obtain in reality. And you have to believe it is the case. He doesn't put those in the exact terms, but later scholarship, we just call it the JTB theory of knowledge. But Plato doesn't say that's what is required for knowledge. He says you have to have at least those things. So it's JTB, justification, a justified true belief is necessary but not sufficient for knowledge. So you have to have at least those three things. And that's a fun thing. I think Chisholm has his counter arguments to JTB. But basically my favorite one is the easiest one. And I can't remember the guy's name now, but the guy who owns the paper that Peter Parker works for is at a banquet, and Peter Parker walks over to him. He's like, "Oh, hey, Peter." And then the Green Goblin crashes in through the roof, and someone dressed in a Spider-Man outfit comes crashing in after him. And the owner of the paper that Peter Parker works for goes, "I just saw Spider-Man." So by the JTB definition, he has justification. He saw Spider-Man. It's true because Peter Parker is standing right next to him. And he believes it's the case because he trusts his own eyes that what he sees in the world is actually, you can actually obtain knowledge from it. So the JTB argument fails because he's pointing at an imposter saying, I just saw Spider-Man. But if it's just JTB for knowledge, it obtains because Peter Parker's standing right next to him. That's my favorite one. But there's lots of counter arguments to JTB. There's some really complicated ones, like with like the original ones. I think Chisholm's are like, two guys are working together, and one guy has four dimes in his pocket. And, it's like these complicated ones, but there's some more modern ones that are fun. There's a whole Marvel series on them. All right. So for knowledge, that's JTB. You have to have at least a justified true belief. But now, this is the other beautiful thing. For his epistemology, he has a certain harmony to his philosophy. So for his his 4 stages of knowledge, is it 4 on the line? One, two, three, four. Yeah, it's 4 stages of knowledge. He has 4 stages of being. So they don't reflect each other. I can't think of the word. There's a certain symmetry. They're symmetrical. It's really, really nice philosophy. I really like this part. All right, 509D. Keep flipping back and forth. Okay. Socrates speaking. Understand then that as we said, there are these 2 things, one sovereign of the intelligible kind and place, the other of the visible. I don't say of heaven so as not to seem to you to be playing the sophist with the name. Footnote though. There's a play. There's actually a play called Of the Visible or Of Heaven. Got it. In any case, you have 2 kinds of things, visible and intelligible. Right, Glaucon says. It is like a line divided into 2 unequal sections. Then divide each section, namely that of the visible and that of the intelligible, in the same ratio as the line. In terms now of relative clarity and opacity, one subsection of the visible consists of images. And by images, I mean first shadows. So like in a cave, the shadows on the wall. Then reflections in water and all the close-packed, smooth, and shiny materials, and everything of that sort, if you understand. So again, as you're emerging from the cage, the first thing you see is the fire, which represents, remember the cave is this big, wide open mouth cave. The walls are as wide as the mouth of the cave. So you're at the very bottom of it. As soon as you turn around, you see the fire that's projecting the shadows from the people passing by. And there's the wall that's up. So they're carrying things on their, above the wall. And all you see is the shadows from the things they're carrying. So you turn around, you come up. First thing is you see the fire and the light beyond. And so you get a sense that there is a good, because you know that there's the fire, which is illuminating the fact that these shadows are not the ultimate reality. And then you see the light beyond, which is a precursor to the sun, which represents the good. Okay. And then when you get outside the cave, you see you can't look at the sun directly. You have to look at it through, a reflection in the water because your eyes still are not adjusted from being in the cave for so long, etc. So first you see the shadows, then reflections in water and impact earth and all that sort of thing. Do you understand, Glaucon? I do. In the other subsection of the visible, put the originals of these images, namely the animals around us, all the plants, and the whole class of manufactured things. Consider them put. Would you be willing to say that as regards to truth and untruth, the division is in the proportion as the opinionable is to the knowable, so the likeness is to the thing that it is like? Certainly. Consider now how the section of the intelligible is to be divided. How? As follows. In one subsection, the soul, using as images the things that were imitated before, is forced to investigate from hypotheses, proceeding not to a first principle but to a conclusion. In the other subsection, however, it makes its way to a first principle. That is not a hypothesis. Proceeding from a hypothesis, but without the images used in the previous subsection, using forms themselves and making its investigation through them. I don't fully understand what you mean. Let's try again. You'll understand it more easily after the following preamble. I think you know that students of geometry, calculation, and the like hypothesize the odd and the even, the various figures, the three kinds of angles, and other things akin to these in each of their investigations. As if they knew them. They make these their hypotheses and don't think it necessary to give any account of them, either to themselves or to others, as if they were clear to everyone. And going from these first principles through the remaining steps, they arrive in full agreement. I certainly know that much. So he's just basically saying once you know things like the Pythagorean theorem and other geometrical first principles that always obtain, you can arrive at the same conclusions. Then you also know that although they use visible figures and make claims about them, their thought isn't directed to them. So he means the actual figures, we use Arabic symbols, but I'm writing a number 3. My thought is not directed to that symbol, but the representation of what it means when I'm doing an equation. Then you know that although they use visible figures and make claims about them, their thought isn't directed to them, but to those other things that they are like, that is to say, that which they participate in. That's me adding. They make their claims for the sake of the square itself and the diagonal itself, not the diagonal they draw. So itself, meaning the form, the ideal, the perfect one that exists with the forms. Similarly with others. These figures that they make and draw, of which shadows and reflections in water are images, they now in turn use as images, in seeking to see those others themselves that one cannot see except by means of thought. Well, that's true. So that's what he means by the intelligible. How far do we go with this? A little bit further. This, then, is the kind of thing that, on the other hand, I said, is intelligible, and on the other is such that the soul is forced to use hypotheses in the investigation of it, not traveling up to a first principle, since it cannot reach beyond its hypotheses, but using as images those very things of which images were made in the section below, and which, by comparison to their images, were thought to be clear and to be valued as such. I understand what you mean. What happens in geometry and related sciences? Indeed, Glaucon, you're getting it, my man. Then also understand that by the other subsection of the intelligible, I mean that which reason itself grasps by the power of dialectic. It does not consider these hypotheses as first principles, but truly as hypotheses, but as stepping stones to take off from, enabling it to reach the unhypothetical first principle of everything. Having grasped this principle, it reverses itself, and keeping hold of what follows from it, comes down to a conclusion without making use of anything visible at all, but only of forms themselves, moving on from forms to forms and ending in forms. I understand, if not yet adequately, for my opinion. For in my opinion, you're speaking of an enormous task. That you want to distinguish the intelligible part of that which is, the part studied by the science of dialectic, as clearer than the first part, as clearer than the part studied by the so-called sciences, for which their hypotheses are first principles. And although those who study the objects of these sciences are forced to do so by means of thought rather than the sense perception, still are forced to do so by means of thought. Oh, still, because they do not go back to a genuine first principle, proceed from hypotheses, you don't think that they understand them, even though, given such a principle, they are intelligible. And you seem to me to call the state of the geometers thought, but not understanding. Thought being intermediate between opinion and understanding. Your exposition is most adequate, my dear Glaucon. All right. So that's the divided line. So there's a figure in the book. You can see how it is divided unevenly at the top. Let's see. Let me read it from my notes. So at the very bottom, you have imagination. Then right above that, you have belief. Then you have thought. And then finally, understanding is at the top. And then those correspond to the objects from the cave. So those are shadows at the bottom, which is what your imagination and belief are participating in. And then as you move up to the forms, that's where you have true understanding. One of these days I'll figure out how to pull up slides and do all that fun stuff so I don't have to hold my book up. But for now, that's what you get. So, and then right after that, he goes into the allegory of the cave, which we read at the beginning of last episode. So if you didn't watch that one, it is your duty to go back and watch it. All right. Nice. We only have one more section left, and I'm not doing any more reading. I'm not doing any more reading. I'm going to tell you a little bit because we've gone over everything. We have gone over everything. I just wanted to go over one more time in case it wasn't clear why we call this transcendental philosophy. And it is that going up that divided line, you start with opinion, looking at the shadows on the walls and thinking that's all of reality. And then he said it a few times, but you always have to use your sense perception. Then you develop a hypothesis and use these hypotheses as stepping stones until you finally are able to abstract into the things that are ultimate form. So like the Platonic solids, for example. Actually, I was about to just call them triangles and stuff, but now I can't remember all the details of the Platonic solids. But let's just use a triangle. Like you can have the hypothesis, okay, every angle of a triangle has to make 180 degrees. So you teach the students that principle, really, it's a first principle, but they only understand it as a hypothesis. And it isn't until you do it and you allow your intellect to rise and rise and rise until you realize like, oh, I'm imitating something that's perfect. 180 degrees actually never obtains no matter how sharp your instrumentation is. And especially back then, they didn't have anywhere near the technology we have. So they're always imperfect representations, but it is true because you can prove it mathematically. And the mathematicians, the geometers have proved, they understand the first principle that every triangle, when you add up all the degrees of each angle, it will always equal 180 degrees, even though you can never perfectly recreate it here. So the students learn those as just hypotheses. They just have opinions, and then when they become hypotheses, they have thoughts, but they don't have noesis. They don't have noesis, which is understanding of the true form. So that is transcendental philosophy. And as our mind ascends from the what does he call it? from the opinion to the form to the sensible objects to the intelligible objects, as your intellect ascends, as your intellect, as your intellect ascends, so your soul also ascends with it. And so, but once you get to the first principle, the form, remember, I'm only going to repeat this because it was confusing for me when I learned it. I always thought a first principle should be, your foundation of what you build on, but you actually, what we start down here on Earth, he's imagining it transcending up to where they are. We start with our sense perceptions and we transcend up to the form, and then we have to bring that knowledge of the form back down. So we're constantly transcending, but the more first principles we know, the more application we have in life, which is where all of this will come into play when we get into ethics in a few weeks' time. So the form of the good in Republic 508 to 509 is beyond being. It's beyond being. Yet the source of truth, knowledge, and existence for all other forms analogous to the sun's role it's beyond being, yet is the source of truth, knowledge, and existence for all other forms, analogous to the sun's role in the visible realm. So the form of the good is beyond being in Republic 508 to 509. In Symposium 210 to 211, Diadema, she gives a little argument for the ladder of ascent that leads from physical beauty to the single eternal form of beauty itself. So there's the absolute, separate, simple, and everlasting beauty, the transcendent cause of all beautiful things. So as our soul transcends, so do the forms transcend. That's how we're able to know them, guys. And if you don't believe me, you just haven't thought about it enough. Phaedrus 247 C to E, and then Phaedrus 250 B to D. Before embodiment, souls behold the plane of truth. We already talked about that for about 10,000 years before they can even grow their wings. That's right, your soul has wings, containing the forms of justice, temperance, knowledge, beauty, and goodness. These transcendent realities are what the philosophic soul recollects and yearns to regain. Sophist 246A to 40D forms as ousia, or that would be the primary nature of being, ousia. Ousia is also another word that's used for soul, another Greek thought. And then there's the forms, the id, or the idea, as eternal, immutable paradigms. That's in Phaedo 78 to 80, Republic Book 6, 507 to 509. Oh, that's the same one. Yeah. And then some other examples. We talked about the form of beauty in Symposium. Yeah. That's it. We did it. That's Plato's Metaphysics, guys. The chat is very quiet. You guys got anything for me? Nothing? Checking 1, 2. I see I got 3 viewers. You guys aren't going to talk to me, huh? All right. Well, that's it then. Look at that. We did it in an hour and 29 minutes. That's a beautiful thing right there. That is a beautiful thing. All right. Well, next week, we're going to be getting into Aristotle's Metaphysics. It's a little bit more formulated. I like it a lot. I like Socrates. I like Plato a lot. But if I were going to lean more one way, it's probably more towards Aristotle. But then after we get into Aristotle, we're probably going to touch on Plotinus just a little bit so that we can jump straight to St. Augustine. And Augustine's metaphysics is Neoplatonic, very influenced by Plotinus. And I just picked up a new set of the Ennead by Plotinus, so I'm excited for that. And I'll be able to do some more primary primary sources for you guys. And that's what you get here. You get primary sources. We get to dig into the material. All right. If you did not watch episode 1 of Plato's Metaphysics, go back and watch it. And if you did, then you're good to go. I'll catch you guys next time. Oh, it is, if you know anyone who likes philosophy, share this with them. I need feedback. I want to know what everyone's thinking. I want to improve this over time. I would like for this to take off. So share this. I see a number of you guys liked. I see a number of you subscribed. That's exciting, but yeah, as many eyes on this as possible. Any criticisms or critiques, like don't show your dog's crate in the mirrors. I don't know. That's probably not that big a deal, but let me know what I can do to improve, and I would love to hear it. Thank you so much. I'll catch you guys next time.